Hello, I'm Becky Campbell from Sew Forever Quilting, and I'm here to show you how to straight stitch these shapes together from the Milleflori quilt book by William Hammerstein. And you need this book in order to put the quilt together. But I created English paper piecing made easy, modern, to use as self-stitch templates so that you can straight stitch by hand or machine. And that eliminates gluing, basting, whip stitching, or pulling any of the papers. Even these little isosceles triangles can be pieced by machine or straight stitched by hand. So then they will go together to make a rosette. So follow along and I'll show you how you can do this by straight stitching. Stacy asked me to create a video so that you could see how the Passacaglia shapes get sewn together. And the pattern is in this book. These are a tool to help you sew by hand or by machine, straight stitching the shapes together. This is the quilt, and there are 5 shapes involved, and these are self-stitch templates I created to make the stitching easy so that you don't have to baste, whip stitch, or pull papers later. 5 shapes, 2 different pentagon shapes, 2 different diamond shapes, and then isosceles triangle. So I will show you how these get cut apart, and then we will stitch the shapes together so that you can see how that happens. All right, I'm going to show you how to cut these apart. I started this, but I guess I wasn't videotaping. So we'll go to this one, and we're going to just cut on the solid black lines with a ruler and a rotary cutter. So we just carefully line it up and cut along and then this will be along the top, and then we'll continue to do that. Then we'll switch to scissors and just carefully cut these out on the solid black lines. I would like to have them stamped out for you, but economically that is just not possible right now. So it still takes a lot less time than gluing and basting, whip stitching, and pulling papers at the end. So we'll get these cut out. This one, you would just want to look for your most economical cuts, and this would be on the diagonal that you would be able to cut these out carefully. Continue to do that. Same with these diamonds, and then the isosceles triangles will just be cut when you go through the diagonal. I wanted to cover a tip that I realized when you do these diamonds with the isosceles triangles on the end, if you line this up and cut along here, you won't have to trim each one of these. We'll just cut that like this, and then the bottoms of all those are trimmed off for you. And then we go back to our trimming, cutting these out on the solid black lines, and then I would go back with the scissors and then cut these apart because it's too much time to line up each thing. It's easier just to cut like that. This is your little isosceles triangle that's on the bottom of those diamonds. So that'll save you some time. When I was going to show you how to cut these out, I thought that it might be a good idea to speak a little bit about how I choose the fabrics for them. There are 10 of these 1.25" pentagons. I will check and see what motif will fit in those to determine what I want to cut out. The center has the 1.25" diamond, so I want something that will pop out. This is dark, and then these go around this here. And so I wanted to pick something that was light. And then when we go out to the outer edges, we need the little pentagons. So these are 3/4 inch pentagons. So we'll need the little ones. So I thought that this motif would fit in there. It would be light out there. Then we would repeat this diamond with the same fabric that is on the center so that you're getting lights and darks, but the fabrics are relating to each other. This could be the little star points. I will go ahead and show you how I cut these out, and we'll get to how to sew them. So I'm going to open up my fabric, remove the paper backing so I can stick this to the fabric where I want it. If you have a light box, that's helpful to determine exactly what you're going to see in the motif. Well, that extends a little bit, so I might want a different one. That's still a little too big. This one's a good one. This one is a good one too. I like a motif that's going to fill it up. The other thing I need to make sure is that I have 10 of these to cut. Hopefully there's clearance around there. If we go across here, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can't use this one on the end. Let's see if we can go up further, and then that's the same repeat. So we would have enough. So I'm going to put my template on that, get it up here so you can see. I want to look at it on the light box. Turn on the light box. Here's the template. and I'm going to turn it over. I might need to turn this light off so that you can see a little bit better. Okay, so here's the template. It's a little hard to see, and it's got pretty good clearance around there. This sticks out a little bit, and there's a little bit of the flower there, but I'm all right with that. You can see the templates there. I'm going to turn this back over. I'm going to take our 1/4-inch ruler, trim this out, and the 1/4-inch ruler butts up against the template. You're going to just trim. You can use a rotating mat, but sometimes with this much fabric, it gets caught on the mat. I just turn it. All right, so we've got this out, and then what we want to do, go down here and find the next flower repeat, and this is going to be right here. So we can cut this again, just leave the template on there, line everything up like that. So all these motifs around here line up really well. Then cut this. And this template, even though it's not sticking to the fabric, stays in place pretty well. So that gets me another repeat, which is the same as this one. And I would just do this 10 times. So this, I'm not going to focus cut anything out of it. I need 5 of these. Remove the paper from the back. If there's not a split in the paper, sometimes it's helpful to use a pin to get the paper backing off. And we'll just pull that off. So I have 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I need 5. So I'll probably just fold it again. I'll get 6, but it's just easier than fooling with the fabric. So just stick it on there so that you have a 1/4 inch around. The shape is the same on all sides, so I don't have to worry about making sure I'm cutting on the right or wrong side of the fabric. And then you get all your cuts at once instead of cutting it 5 different times. If it moves, you can just line them back up. And these points, I line up the 1/4 inch with the point and just trim those off. It makes it easier at matching things up. So make sure they're stacked up again and just trim that off. This gives you all the diamonds that you need for the center. The little pentagons on the outside ring, let's see what we can fit in here. This little flower looks like a good option. And I'm gonna take the paper off with the help of a pin. This looks like a good motif. And if you don't have a light box, you can hold it up to a window to see if you've got what you want. I like that where I've got it. Light boxes, you can buy a very inexpensive light box on Amazon. Just like before, we're going to trim the little pentagon out. Because we are focus cutting, or otherwise known as fussy cutting, we can't stack and cut. So we're going to come back here like we did before, line this motif up with the little things that are around it. Sometimes you have to readjust a little bit because this leaf here was barely in there. That's lining up and that's lining up. And then we trim this one out just like we did before. I'm going to share a little bit of tips for you when you're trying to make some design decisions. I've laid out my pieces here because I want to determine what I want the star points to be. And so it helps me if I lay this out to look at it like that, because this is really dark. I think this would be a good choice. This would be another choice. I like the contrast of this. So you can just take a look and see what it is that you like once you've laid out your pieces. So I think I'll go with the star points for this little dot. Then one of the organizations that help me keep from losing little pieces is to pick these up, clip them together with the template so you know which ones they are and you won't lose your pieces. The other organizational tip that I wanted to show you was this is just a sleeve and you don't have to cut out all your pieces. So the pieces that you don't cut out, you can slip into into here, and then you'll be able to go back and find them. I wanted to share that if you have shapes that are the same color, you can make a little note on your template, and this one says middle, so that I know that this goes in the middle and these are the outside ones. This fabric collection, Gail Lorraine, created by Elizabeth Chapwell. It's named Gail Lorraine in honor of her mother, so that you know what this fabric comes from. For the star points, because there are so many of them, I'm going to stack my fabric up. I've just cut off some. So I've got 8 layers here, and I'm just going to use the add-a-quarter ruler to trim these out. So I'll get 8 at a time, and we'll have to do the math to figure out. This little corner didn't cut, so I'll just take a pair of scissors and cut that apart, and it'll work fine. Like I mentioned before, you can use the add-a-quarter ruler at the point and trim off these points so they make it easier to match up. Same with these corners. Some corners you can't cut off, but some of them you can, and that will work with this. So we've got 8 at a time, and then I'll just pick this up, put it on a new stack of fabric, and cut some more isosceles triangles. I wanted to show you, since I think there are 50 star points if I'm doing my math right, I can take and cut a strip of fabric that is a little bigger than the size, because I do want to trim around all sides. So I'm going to cut this strip of fabric, and then I'm going to put this on here. In order for it to not get out of line, I'm going to iron this so I have a iron stack, and I know that my sides are going to line up. 8 is about the best you can cut. After that, you're probably going to get a little out of line because of the height of it. So I've ironed this stack so that I know that these edges here are lined up, and I can lay my template on there, and I'm going to bring it down from the top a little bit. I want to trim that in case these aren't exact. So this way we're getting 8 at a time, and we're not having to struggle with a large piece of fabric with this tiny little piece. I want to point out one thing that I did. Little pentagons, when they're placed inside of the design, the point is going to go towards the center. I would have preferred my flower to be like that. Since I've cut them all, the flower is going to point towards the center. So that's something good to pay attention to, that when you cut out your motif, realize that the point on the bottom, if you want your flower to face outward, you're going to need to account for that. There are lots of ways to sew these shapes together, and in the book they give you directions as to how they do it. I don't always do it like this. I don't make the circles and then insert the rest. I prefer to start with a larger shape and then add around it versus trying to work with the tiny little isosceles triangle. We'll take a look at that. The first thing we need to do is we're going to take this sticker off the front of the fabric and move it to the back and center it. You can fold the edges a little bit just to give you a little bit of help finding where the center is. I really don't do that. I just pretty much eye it up. So we've removed it from the front, and we're going to center it on the back, trying to get an even 1/4 inch around. Then we're going to stitch. So we're going to put right sides together, making sure that your motifs are going in the same direction. We're going to line this up, and we're going to stitch from this corner to that corner, tacking at the beginning and the end. We'll go over to the machine and take a look at how you do that. So we have right sides together. We're going to set our needle down on the corner of the template and drop my foot. I'm going to sew along the edge of the template, not through it, making sure I'm still lined up here. And I'm going to tack at the beginning and at the end. I'm going to take a stitch, go back, and then sew right along the edge. And then my machine will cut the thread and tack at the end for me. So when I push this button, it takes a stitch forward. So I always allow for that. So it ends up right on the edge of the template. So we've sewn right along there. And then I trim my threads so everything stays nice and neat. They're both going the same way. That's what we want. So for efficiency and use of the templates, I like to add as many things as I can to one that has the template on it. So I don't need to realign the template as many times. This little 1.25" diamond goes here. I'm going to line it up here, right sides together, and that's why it's helpful when I cut the little tips off, it lines up better. You want to make sure that this is in the center, but this gets you more in the range so that you don't have that long tip. And you can fold it back. So I'm finding the center there. So when I lay it down, I know that it's in the center. You have to account for the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip this over, and I'm going to look and see if I'm going to be in the center. And I can see this is the seam, and that's the center of the diamond. And this time my machine will tack for me. So put my needle down, drop my foot, and then just stitch along the edge of the template. And don't sew into the seam allowance, and just tack and cut your threads. And then we've got the little diamond sewn onto the pentagon. I'm going to back up a little bit. I think the best place to start would be in this center piecing. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to take this template off of the front of the fabric, turn it over, place it in the middle of the fabric shape. And sometimes if you want, you can fold your templates. You want to fold them to not the sticky side. Then you can find the center, and it sometimes will help you line up. As you do it more, you'll get a better eye for the 1/4 inch. But I'm just showing you some tricks that can help you in the beginning if you're struggling with that. So I found those centers. I'm looking to see, am I about in that center? And that looks good. We're going to make sure that we put right sides together. One piece has a template, piece you're adding does not. So we're going to put right sides together, and then we're going to stitch along this template. So we're going to go to the machine to do that. One thing that I want to point out to you that will be helpful is that when you're sewing the isosceles triangles to the 3/4 inch pentagon, it's best to go through and sew all these isosceles triangles to the pentagon before you add the diamonds on both sides. You're going to not have enough diamonds to go around. So because there's already a diamond here, this will go there, and then this will be added here. Since this diamond is here, you will add this, and you can add these as you go along, because otherwise, if you first stitch the diamonds to both sides, you will have doubled up. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, so we've got these center diamonds right sides together, and we want to have them lined up well. We're going to take and set the needle down, tip of that template, drop my foot, and my machine is going to tack for me at the beginning, and then I'm going to stitch to the end. If your machine doesn't tack for you, you just want to reverse one stitch, and then at the end it will tack for me and cut the thread, and it moves forward one stitch when I do that. So I account for that. Here's a good demonstration. I should have sewn this seam because they come together not like this, but this. So that's one thing to pay attention to. So I'm going to take that stitch out and correct that for you. That was actually good that happened, so that you're aware of where you need to be stitching. So we need to be stitching down these two together here, not up there, so the motif is going in the right direction. We'll line it up and stitch down the correct side. I'll get my hand out of the way here in a minute. Okay, tacking at the beginning, stitching to the other side, tacking at the end. And then open this up, and we've got what we want. And then we're going to turn this over. We want to add another piece to that side, and making sure that we're adding it to the proper side. So right sides together, going to turn it over, going to line it up, and we want to make sure that the seam allowances stay out of the way. So we're going to put it here, put the needle down right at the edge of that template, set my foot down, tack and stitch, tack again. So we've added that. We'll just take this template off, and we'll move it to, if I put it on here, I'll only be able to sew one side. If I center it on a separate one, I'll be able to sew two sides without having to move the template. Make sure we're sewing where we want to. So we're going to put these two together, flip it over, line them up, and these seam allowances are out of the way. Drop my needle, and sometimes I drop my needle just to get it in position, and then I can make sure I have this lined up and these are out of the way, making sure that this little guy is going to be right in the center. I'm going to stitch down there, and I'm going to pull, well, it's out of the way, so that's fine. Stitch right into there, tack. That's pretty good. I could have stitched taken another stitch there, but it will be fine. So we're going to open this up here and add this one here. So right sides together, line it up, flip it over, and I'm making sure that all of these seam allowances are out of the way. Put it underneath. Sometimes the seam allowances get pulled out or like flipped around when you're putting it up against the feed dogs. So while you use this little purple thing to kind of scoop them out of the way. So put my needle down, and you can feel if you've got something underneath there. So drop my foot and stitch. If you wanted, you could just line these up. If you're good at eyeing up the 1/4 inch, drop your needle at the 1/4 inch and drop your foot so you know you're at your 1/4 inch. I'm going to raise that up. I'm not quite at the 1/4 inch. Move it over a little bit more. Drop the needle at the 1/4 inch, put your foot down, and I can see that I'm going to sew on the 1/4 inch line, making sure that my seam allowances are out of the way, and I'm going to just stitch right to where I can see that stitch in there. All right, so we can open it up, and that is pretty good. If I wasn't worried about jiggling the camera around, it could be a little bit better, but it'll still work just fine. This is what this will look like. So we're going to iron them in a spiral, and then the center will lay nice and flat, and there we have our center. So we're going to add these diamonds to the sides. So we've put our sticker on the wrong side of the diamond, and I like to fold these in half so I can see where the center is, because it helps in lining it up to the other piece. We're going to line this up, then this is going to come right to the center of that seam. I'm going to put it down here. I can feel with my fingernail where that is. I'm going to put it there. Set our needle down at the corner of the template like we've done before. Put down, and I want to back stitch if my machine doesn't back stitch. And I'm going to just sew to the top of that point of that template. Tack again. And we can tell that we've gotten it right because it goes right up against there. So we're going to fold it up and flip it around. And if you haven't sewn through the seam allowances, it will flip really nicely for you. So match that side up, open up this seam allowance, push it back out of the way so that you're not stitching it down. Make sure that the feed dogs don't pull it back. Put your needle down at the top of that point. Make sure we're lined up on the side here, and stitch to the end of the template and tack. We're at a 1/4 inch there, and we're right in there where we need to be at the intersection. So we're going to take this off and add another diamond. This is in review. So we're going to add the diamond here. We're going to make sure that our seam allowance is folded back when we place this here, and you want to line them up. This little point is going to go right up against that seam allowance right here. So we're going to line that up, and then this is going to end up, when we do the 1/4 inch, right at that seam. Fold those seam allowances back out of the way. Line up your edge so that they're even. Again, I'm going to use this little thing to make sure they don't get bent back down. I can feel that it's right there. Drop my needle at the top of the point, tacking at the beginning, and sewing to the top of the point and tacking. So you can tell if you've gotten it right because these two stitching lines match up and the top matches up. And then we're going to fold it up and flip it around like that. Line them up again, and making sure the seam allowance is pulled back out of the way. Back down. Get it in place. Put your needle down. I'm lined up there. So our diamond's sewn on, and these little seam allowances are not sewn together or down, and they're free to flip around. So we'll just continue to add those diamonds to this side, and then we can add the next shape. All right, I'm going to try it from this angle to see if you can get a better view. So we are flipping this up, matching these sides, folding the seam allowance out of the way, feeling to make sure that this is right up against that seam, and these sides are matched up. Scoop those seam allowances out of the way. Drop my needle, tack, and I can also use my 1/4 inch foot as a guide to make sure that it's just a second check, see that I'm where it needs to be. Bring it up, and we've got one more to go. Remove your template, center it on the wrong side of your diamond. Reminder, I like to fold them so that it helps me fit them in. This is seam allowances laying this way, so I don't need to worry about getting it out of the way. I'm going to place it in the center there. Now this seam allowance back here out of the way. Make sure that point is right where it needs to be. I can feel that other seam. Drop my needle. Make sure this seam allowance is out of the way. stitch to the top of that point, tack. Then we're going to flip again, line these up, making sure the seam allowance lays out of the way. Fold this seam allowance up, out of the way. Need to position that so that it's going on the diagonal. Get it underneath my needle, drop my needle, and this point is going right into that other seam allowance. You scoot that over a little bit. So all of our diamonds are sewn to the center. We'll add the next shape. There are numerous ways that we can do this. We could leave our diamond shape on and add the pentagons to that. And each time I add another layer of shape, I want to make sure I press this out. You won't always be able to whirl them around. That one didn't whirl around because it just couldn't. So you just press it flat. So I will show you both ways to add the pentagon. Right now, I'm going to add this pentagon. This is the larger pentagon, the 1¼ pentagon. And I'm going to add that to the top of the diamond. In doing that, I want to make sure this corner is snug up against this seam right there. And you'll be able to feel it. All right. So we're going to put this down. This corner of the template is snug against that seam allowance. And then this seam allowance, or this point, is going to be right in the center of that diamond. Same thing. Make sure the seam allowances are out of the way, that you're not stitching through them. Needle down, check your alignment, and stitch to the corner of the template. So you're going to know you got it right when you're right in the center of the template. Add another pentagon to that side. So like I said, there are just multiple ways to add shapes. If I want to, I can just add the pentagon, another pentagon here, since I already have the template on. So we could line this up like this, flip it over, make sure our seam allowances are out of the way, needle down at the corner. Here's the one we just added. And then this is going to flip over here, and we can move this pentagon sticker over to this side, line it up with the stitch lines and the 1/4 inch. And then we're going to lift it up and flip around again. If you have trouble flipping around, that's because you've sewn too far into a seam allowance. And if that's the case, cut that one thread that's keeping you from flipping around, maybe just a stitch too far. So that released it. There we go. And flip around. Make sure we're straightened out here. And we only want to be working with a template on one side. So we've got our seam allowances out of the way. Things are laying flat. These guys need to be lifted out of the way too, so that our corner of the template is going to come right to the edge there of the other seam. All right, so we've got the 2 pentagons, and that's what they look like. Now, if we wanted to stitch it, take this off. So we don't want to be working with multiple templates. Take that off. Make sure this diamond is right up against that seam allowance, and then we can add pentagons to the diamond with the sticker if you want to do it that way. I don't want it to be confusing, but I do want you to know pretty much any way you put them together is not wrong. So we could have stitched 2 of the pentagons together if we're going to use the diamond template and add that there. And you want to pay attention to the direction of your motif so that you don't have it going upside down. It's easy to get that mixed up. So we're going to line this up here and flip it over. I'm going to feel to see if that point is up against that seam allowance, and it is. Line the rest of this up, get it underneath it without feed dogs in the way. Drop your needle, and then you should be, I don't know if you can see this, but this little point is going to line up right with the other seam. Push this down. And my machine advances, like I mentioned before, when I cut the thread. So I always account for that 1 stitch forward. All right, so this side is on. And then it's just a matter of pulling that up and out of the way and flipping this. And then that lays very nicely there. We're going to turn it over because you want to always be sewing with the template on the top so you can see what you're doing. And that comes right into that seam. Flip it over and make sure these are out of the way. Pull this out a little bit just so we make sure it's not getting nested in here. And then open this up, needle down at the point, tack, and stitch to the top of that. All right, so that's how they go together. Now we want to take this template out because we don't need it anymore for that point. And then these two seams here, we can simply flip over. Don't really need a template on them. Line them up, and then I just eye up where I drop my needle at 1/4 inch down. Put my foot down, and my foot lines up with the edge of the fabric. And see, we got to make sure this is out of the way. And then we just sew 1/4 inch right into up to, not into, but right up to that other seam, and we didn't need the template for that. It's right up to that other seam. So we've put 4 of these on like that. And just keep in mind that things look better once they're pressed. You will be quilting this, so any tiny mistakes that you make, it'll be quilted out. The other thing I want to mention is I'm sewing with white thread, 1, so that you can see it, and 2, because I pretty much sew with white thread all the time. You could use a light gray, but you do not have to change your threads all the time to match the fabric, because by the time it's all done, you're just not going to see any of that. This is where we are at so far. So we have the center diamonds, the 72-degree inch diamonds, the 1.25 inch pentagons. You can sew these together in any order that you like I showed you. But when it comes to the 3/4 inch pentagons, I really like to sew the isosceles triangle to the larger template than to try and sew this. And it requires less movement. You want these sides to line up nicely. That indicates you've got it in the right place. We just have a stack of these here. We'll do right sides together again. And when we're sewing this shape, the seam allowances pretty much all stay out of the way, so we don't have to worry much about paying attention to that. Okay, stitch again. Stitch right up to the other stitch line. Open this up. Add another isosceles triangle. Open this up. Right sides together. Add another one. Open this one up and add the last piece for this star. Right sides together. This one is a little harder to line up because you can't see the actual template. So I just kind of pinch those to make sure that it's divided pretty even. So I'm pinching against this other seam allowance to see, am I over there enough? We've got a star point. If you think about it, think how much time you would spend turning all these isosceles triangles, like basting, gluing, and then trying to whip stitch them on. In less than pretty much 3 minutes, we've got this whole piece sewn. So we're going to remove this template because there isn't anything else to sew onto that. These diamonds, this is our point that's pointing down into that V right there. Nope, this is the point. So you want to look at that. So we need our diamonds to go here and here. So you don't want to be adding a diamond to there or up here. So here's our diamond, and I'm going to center this on the wrong side. Remembering you can fold your template and your fabric. You'll get pretty good at eyeing it up. So once again, this is the point that's pointing down towards the center. And so this template needs to go, or this fabric needs to go here. I want to pay attention to the motif, that it's going in the right way. So we're going to lay it down along here. And now we want to make sure we've folded the seam allowance out of the way. I'm going to get it up to the needle and feel if I'm right where I want it to be. I can even bend this back, and I know you probably can't see that. Let me pull it out. I can bend this back if I'm going to be lining up and touching the corner of that isosceles triangle. And my seam allowances are out of the way. Keep it back here so that it doesn't get tangled up. And then once again, I'm going to put my needle down just to hold that in place. And then I can come back in here and line up the rest of this. And I'm looking at my 1/4 inch foot because it also assures me that at the edge of my 1/4 inch foot, because it also assures me that I'm stitching the right thing. Because you're using the template, you're going to get the exact shape for the diamond. All right, so we've got it there. The point is down there. And then once again, we're just going to flip like we've been doing. See how nicely that lays down? Make sure our seam allowances are out of the way and our template is right on this seam here. So you can see right there, it's going to line up. If you need to line up a little bit, you can reach underneath and readjust the underlying fabric. So we open this up and we have a lovely point right there. This is my point down. I'm always checking to make sure. I want to remove this template and center it on another diamond. There, it's centered on another diamond. And then I'm going to go point down. This puts point down. So this one is going to go here. It's kind of curving, but that's because it's going to end up going around a circle. Doesn't matter which side you sew first. We're going to put this here, line it up, get our seam allowances out of the way. Make sure that this is tucked up tight. So it's tight right up in there. Probably hard for you to see from that angle, but when I held it up last time, you've got the idea. Right up there, and you can feel it with your fingernail. Seam allowances are out of the way. Needle down, line up the edges. So we're up against this seam, and now we want to flip this over again, just like before. I think that sometimes it's easier sewing from the point in because your seam allowances don't have to get tangled up in the feed dog. But sometimes that's just not possible because of the direction that you need to go. All right, this is our star point, and we can remove this. And I like to iron the units before I add them to other things. We have our star points. I am going to go back like I do. Like I said, I like to piece to the bigger templates. So I'm going to line this one up with the stitch lines that I did previously. And it won't be exactly perfect, but it'll be close enough. You're attempting to get a 1/4 inch along here. This is going to go right there. So I'm going to flip this over, and we're going to make sure the seam allowance is out of the way. Be lined up a little bit more so my edges are together, and these will involve a little bit of manipulation. Once again, I've got this here, and I want it to be right against there. I'm going to look at this one, and when I do a 1/4 inch, it's probably pretty hard to see, but that is right there. Again, it's a thing that you can feel. Don't want our feed dogs or our seam allowances stuck in the feed dogs. Look, we want this seam allowance too to flip it out of the way so we're not stitching through it. So we have a nice intersection right there with those stitch lines. We've got this one sewn on, and we're going to just flip this side over and line up it again. Once again, this seam allowance is going to need to lay out of the way as this one does too. Hold on to it, just readjust it a little bit. Check and see if it's where you want it to be against that other seam. That looks pretty good. Loop these in, needle down, check and make sure the seam allowances are out of the way and my edges are lined up. I'm sewing really close to the template because I'm paying attention to the edge of my sewing foot to make sure that I'm really close to the 1/4 inch. Open this up. There you have your star point sewn on. So all we need to do is remove this template. So here's what we've got. So these star points go to there. So we've got our template on our diamond. We want this point to go down. So right sides together. Gets a little confusing. This is going right there. Right sides together, and make sure that these have to be out of the way. This is challenging, but once you do it a couple times, you'll be fine. There's my right there going into that star point. Move it up a little bit, and then right there into there. Make sure these guys are out of the way down here. So let's put this one up here on the diamond. And again, it's just a matter of flipping it around. It's going to lay down very nicely. I'm going to pull it up a little bit just so it gets lined up better. Get the seam allowances out of the way. Pull it down. Hold my thread. And stitch to the point. All right, so we've got that on there with the leaves going in the right direction. So I'm going to remove this template, and I am going back to the pentagon. Just come back here, get these seam allowances out of the way so you can line it up with your stitching. So we've got it on the wrong side. We're going to flip this around. Seam allowances out of the way. I'm going to do this so you know all the tricks. I'm going to put the needle down at a 1/4 inch. And when I drop my foot, it's not far enough over. I'm going to end up sewing through the template. So if that happens, I can take the template off, just sew with the 1/4 inch of my foot so I get a better lineup and I'm not sewing through the template. It's just like a fraction of it's like a thread length. It enables you to get your points better. Oh, I took it off. If you want to do it like this, Sometimes these are just as easy because you can just flip them. You already have your guidelines from the other stitching that you did. Want to make sure this is flipped up. Always checking for those seam allowances. Put your foot down. So you can use your other seams, and this is the selvage because I ran out of the 10 flowers, and by the time it gets quilted down, you won't notice it. So that's how we add these. You need the book to be able to put together this quilt because there are numerous combinations of these rosettes that fit into each other. So like I mentioned before, the templates are simply a tool to enable you to straight stitch by hand or by machine, but you need the book to figure out how all the rosettes go together. If you have questions or comments, just leave them below and I will reply to them. The next video that I have on the screen for you to watch is how to applique the Passacaglia to a background fabric, and I left a blooper at the end that's just kind of funny.